Good evening, friends. Today is 22nd April 2000. People and organizations uh, who are caring about this magnificent blue planet will be World Earth Day. And be knowing that the central theme the Earth Day 2022 is investing or invest in our planet. Okay. Just like many other organizations in our organizations, which is totally not-for-profit foundation, which is called Foundation for Ecological Welfare, this magnificent blue planet, and we decided to observe useful for the society and for we have decided to start a new webinar involving young researchers, young ecological or wildlife or biodiversity researchers, then young educationists in this field, who have worked on ground for conservation and restoration of various ecosystems. Before that, I would about few things about Foundation for Ecological Welfare. It has been already carrying out various activities, publishing an e-periodical. It is especially for wetland conservation, which is 9. Recently, we have started a new terrestrial ecosystems and biodiversity, which is called the Living Terra Firma. We have been producing some documentary films on nature, and we have also been conducting interviews of subject experts in the field of conservation and ecology, sustainable development, etc. From today, to mark this auspicious day, as I told you earlier, we are starting this new series involving young researchers and educationists and other. Today, in this first, we have here Indra Baraya. He would be talking about a magnificent topic that is bird migration. We selected this topic. It is very relevant for today. We know that one part of the earth with the other part of earth, and those parts can be thousands of miles apart. And Harindra kind of webinar, I readily accepted it because he will be very Earth Day. He is an early career researcher with from MS University of Baroda. He is currently a PhD scholar at Wildlife Institute of India, Dehradun. His proposed doctoral thesis is for ecology and migration strategies of wintering cranes in Gujarat. For his research, he uses GPS telemetry, GIS modeling, and field observations to answer various questions about ecology of cranes and what is their wintering ecology and what are they in Gujarat. He is focusing on grasslands and agriculture besides wetlands, of course. Interested in field ornithology and getting science in regional languages to aid in wildlife conservation efforts. And I think it is very, very important to communicate science in regional languages. And in today's webinar, he will be using both English and Hindi languages to share his presentations. Today, he will be talking about migration of birds across the Central Asian Flyway, basic methods of studying bird migration, differential migration strategies adopted by birds, and significance of landscape of Gujarat state for migratory birds. His topic is The World Without Boundaries, a synthesis of bird migration across the Central Asian Flyway. So now, without taking much of your time, I would invite Harindra Baraya to start his presentation. Welcome, Harindra.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you, Ketan sir, again for introducing me. So, we all are here gathered to understand about Earth. So, this is my small effort to understand the Earth. So, since you are joining this webinar, you are connected to the Earth and to the wildlife in a way or other. So, you must have sometimes noticed that birds, in particular, in some area or in many of the areas, are disappearing in the certain period of time during the year. But as the certain season comes, they again reappears. Those empty area like this one is suddenly full of birds, so full of life like this one. So this is the questions which has fascinated the people during the 16th century and 17th century, and among the first thinkers who tried to understand why this is happening was the Aristotle. Aristotle explained that birds might be migrating from one area to another area. He also noticed that certain species of birds are getting fattier when it comes to the colder season. So he assumed that this fat is actually helping them to migrate from one area to another area without having a stop or without uh, spending time in eating. But another ideas that Aristotle proposed was rather bizarre. He proposed that birds also undergo the hibernation. Now we know that this is not true, but at that time, since Aristotle said this, he was the great thinker and great philosopher. So since Aristotle proposed this, people readily accepted it. Another very interesting idea Aristotle proposed was that birds metamorphized in some other species. Also, he said that birds are probably hibernating in the mud flats and then coming out as different species. So these are the ideas, very early ideas that people started with in understanding the bird migration. In adding this bizarreness, a professor in 1703 from Harvard wrote that the birds migrate to the moon. This was very unlikely, but it was one of the ideas. However, the mystery was kind of unsolved during 1822 when people in small village in Germany saw a white stork with a spear in its neck. This spear, when they examined, is turned out to be not originated in the same area or in the area around that village or in the Germany itself, but it was actually from Africa. The wood that was used in the spear was from actually the Africa. This gave the idea that birds actually might be taking long distance journeys across the continents. They are the stork essentially traveled for 2,000 miles to go to Africa from Germany. In the subsequent days and years, they found 24 more birds like this, which confirm that definitely there are certain group of birds which are traveling from one area or one landscape to another landscape during certain period of time. So this was the first when they got introduced to the migration, and now we know that there are variety of species which are migrating. For example, the great migration of wildebeest in Africa, also the migration of salmon, a fish, which migrates from salt water to fresh water for spawning. Also, as tiny as butterfly are migrating for long distance, for example, monarch, and definitely the birds. But among all these migrations, birds are one of the most successful group of animals which are very successfully capitalizing in changing resources because they have ability to fly for longer distances at the higher altitudes and crossing the barriers like rivers and mountains and also the ocean. If you talk about wildebeest, salmon, or monarch, they are very habitat specific. They require kind of habitat because they are rather too attached to the ground or the habitat. But in the case of birds, they can fly, and that's why they can cross the barriers comparatively easily when you compare them with wildebeest or salmon or monarch. So that's why the bird migration is very astonishing. It's very fascinating phenomena among all the migrations. So, ladies and gentlemen, I'll be talking today about this very phenomena of bird migration. And since birds do not bother with the boundaries, I'm giving this talk a title, "The World Without Boundaries." And this world without boundaries also, because of today is the Earth Day, and it is it is the very curious questions that how these birds are connecting the different landscape in Earth. So this map actually shows how different landscapes are connected through bird migration. This is uh, uh, very detailed explanation or detailed mapping done by BNHS through the data offering. BNHS, in fact, one of the very early organization that took up uh, this Herculean task to understand the bird migration and understand the connectivity of different landscapes. So why the question is, why do birds migrate? In this graphic, this is very beautiful video covering entire Earth prepared by MoveBanker based on the tracking data. So if you notice here, so when the animals or birds are moving in north, the ice cover in the north is reducing. So when they are reaching there, there is no ice cover. So they will be spending their time in the area which is now open with abundant food availability. And after spending some months or some weeks there, they will start coming back to the southern area. So this is the time when again the northern hemisphere has been taken up by the snow cover. So one of the explanation why birds migrate is the availability of resources. When the resources are very scarce in the northern latitudes, birds do migrate to the southern latitudes. How this migration is originated? So migration in the very early years or early decades, some of the individuals of certain species migrated towards from northern parts to southern parts, and when they return back to northern parts, they produce rather more number of youngs. This is because in southern parts they got very rich food, they got very abundant food, and as a result they got very good energy and they produce more number of youngs. And this was actually triggered by the ice ages. The ice ages has taken up the northern latitudes a certain period of eras, and because of that, birds are forced to move from northern areas to southern areas, and this is the way the migration is thought to be started. However, the migration behaviors also continue to evolve because the climate of the earth is rapidly changing. It is definitely was ever changing, but the speed at which the climate is changing has now increased rapidly. And in response to this increased climate change, birds tend to change their migratory routes. They tend to change their wintering ground as well. And also the number of vagrants are increasing day by day. And these vagrants are definitely the ones who start new migratory flyways in certain species. So here is the example. I said that the ice age has actually shaped the migratory routes, or it triggered the migratory phenomena in the birds. So this is one very interesting study published in Nature, very recent study. It is about the peregrine falcon. You all know that peregrine falcon is the fastest flying bird. So if you look at the figure E, you will see the glacial ice. So this ice has covered almost the entire northern hemisphere, and because of that, the peregrine falcon here in the blue is restricted in small range. Also, very isolated populations in west. So from their breeding ground in northern hemisphere, they used to come to the southern hemisphere, essentially the Southeast Asia, But as the glacial ice started melting, essentially the starting of the end of ice age, they started distributed over the wide distribution range. So now they are all distributed, starting from Siberia to Europe. And as a result of their vast distribution range and breeding range, they needed to find new wintering grounds because the populations from far east cannot travel towards the, or it is rather difficult to travel from that far east or far west to far southern areas. Therefore, they developed new migratory routes, and now we know that there are six different populations in the northern hemisphere that travels to the southern hemisphere. So it is not. I talked about six different populations. So all those populations are not traveling towards the same area. They are traveling different areas. So this travels, this movement, are actually very distinct. And based on these multiple species movements, there are 9 global flyways are defined. So these are virtual flyways, and these are the flyways through which birds are flying. So what we are concerned today is the Central Asian flyway here, and this blue lined area. So I will be talking how birds are moving to between this within this blue area, which is the Central Asian flyway, and what are the populations that are coming to India and also in Gujarat. So again, this is very interesting map which shows the different migratory flyways or different migratory paths of different species across the globe. You can see very long flyways connecting to poles, also very short, also the short flyways like this, and also intermediate flyways. So one of the very important question is how birds decide where to go, and also how do they navigate. So I won't talk much about that because this is kind of out of the scope right now, but definitely I will touch that earth magnetism is one of the clue that birds are using. Birds have their specific receptors in their eyes which can sense the earth magnetism. They also use the geographic references, geographical cues like mountains and riverbeds and deserts and whatnot. They can also sense the light intensity and decide their direction of flight based on the light intensity, and also the stellar positions. So birds that are migrating during the night time, they use the stellar map of the sky. So, and based on the position of stars, they decide their direction of migration. So this is the crucial part that I will be talking much about is the studying bird migration. We know that birds are traveling from one area to another area, but how to study them? So one of the methods that we can employ to study bird migration is the ringing of birds. The ringing of birds is basically capturing the birds and put the ring in their legs or in the legs to identify the individuals. And when we recite them, we can know that okay, this is the bird which was ringed somewhere else, and now it is visible here. So ringing of birds has, apart from understanding the migration phenomena, it has other uses too. So we can also understand the habitat used by birds across their distribution ranges, and also during the flight across the migration flyway. We can also understand their breeding cycle and site fidelity. So breeding cycle, how often they are breeding, what are those particular time periods when they are breeding, and site fidelity. So even during the breeding and after breeding, wintering grounds, and during the migration, what is their site fidelity? Do they use the same areas repeatedly, or do they change their areas? And also we can understand the impacts of environmental factors. So first scientific effort of ringing birds was started in Europe when a Danish teacher named Hans Christian started ringing the European starlings. And in 1903, in Germany, large-scale ringing stations were developed, and they started ringing birds in very large numbers. And as far as India is concerned, Dr. Salim Ali in the 1960s has started the bird ringing in India. And this data set that Dr. Salim Ali started has now grown up to thousands of ringed birds by BNHS. So this is one of the early efforts made by humans to understand bird migration through ringing. So to ring the birds, we need to capture birds. So capturing of birds requires many efforts. It requires very specific scientifically driven efforts. So first of all, we need the permission from the forest department. After that, we need to identify the suitable site for bird capturing. Because when we talk about bird ringing or we talk about migration as a whole, we need to consider not only one species but multiple species. And different species are using different kind of habitat. They have different habits as well, how the way they forage, the way they move, the way they fly is all different. And based on all behaviors, we need to identify the suitable site for bird capturing. So if we talk about shorebirds, whether it is better to capture them during the low tide or do we capture them during the high tide? Or do we capture them from the resting area or do we capture them from their foraging area? If we capture them foraging area, what is the time which is the best suitable for their capturing? So this is one of the very crucial homework that we need to do. Also, if we talk about the region like Gujarat and of course the other part of India, we definitely need to gain the confidence of locals. Because if I talk about Gujarat particularly, people are very sensitive to bird conservation. If you go to certain parts of Gujarat, you will not be allowed to touch the birds. So you need to gain confidence of locals that yeah, you are working for the cause, you are capturing these birds for the cause. You want to understand how they are moving, and then based on that information, you want to save birds, you want to conserve birds. And once you find the suitable site, of course, this observation of bird behavior is also very crucial. I just talked about that behavior is different in different species. Their foraging habits, their moving habits are different. So we need to observe the birds. And this entire process requires so many trial and errors. But once we are done with our homework or our groundwork, we need to decide the capture method. So currently, there are multiple capture methods for birds, one of which is mist nets, slip knot, noose traps, to name another. Also the clap traps and rocket nets and oral tranquilizers. So in India, we do not use rocket nets and oral tranquilizers because rocket net requires a specific machine to launch the net on the birds, and it is rather risky. And also the oral tranquilizers are also risky because we need to add the chemicals in their foods to tranquilize the birds when they eat it. So leaving these two methods apart, I will be talking about mist net, slip knot, noose traps, and clap traps. Mist netting is one of very effective way to capture birds. So in this left picture, we are deploying a net to capture common cranes in the bunny landscape. And this is in this net, our net is rather larger because we are talking about common crane, which is very large species. So larger the species, based on the species, we need to decide what will be the length and width of the net. So if the species is large, you need to have the longer net, and also the mesh size of the net should be decided accordingly. Because if the mesh size is large and the birds you are targeting is small, then it will escape. So we need to consider the species that we are targeting, their size, and based on which we will decide the length and width of the net. And also the timing of netting is very crucial because some birds use different landscapes or different habitat during different time of period. And since we are deploying a net in the area, we also need to consider the light intensity and light availability. So based on this, we need to decide where and when we will be deploying the nets. For example, if I talk about common cranes, we usually deploy the mist net during the evening time or during the dusk time. And when cranes come back to their, we come back to their roosting site, we try to capture them there, because this is the time when cranes are most concentrated, and this is the time when there is no visibility as such. So there are very less chances of them seeing the mist net. If you target small birds, actually the timing of netting matters, but you can capture them during the daytime as well, primarily in the morning or in the evening when they are coming in the foraging grounds from they are coming out of the bushes. So when you talk about mesh net, you need to consider the length and width of net, mesh size of net, and timing of netting, to name a few. The slip knot noose traps are another very effective way to capture birds. We are also employing these methods to capture cranes and flamingos. So these noose traps are made such a way that when birds are walking in the area, it will be stepping on the noose trap, and if when they pull their legs, the traps will be tightened in their legs. So this is the way. For example, if you can see this crab plover here, so it has trapped in the noose trap. But when we employ the noose trap, we need to consider the color of the noose. For example, if you are targeting the wetland habitat, you may want to go with the transparent noose trap. But if you are targeting the grassland, you can use the multicolor noose trap, or the green or yellowish color or brown color noose traps. So the idea is that the color of noose should be camouflaged the background. Also the size of noose. So size of this loop is very crucial. So larger the bird species is, the larger of the size of this loop. If you target birds like this crab plover, you will go with very small loop. But if you target cranes, especially SAS crane, the large species, you will need the largest noose traps that you can make. So this loop size will be decided by the length of toes of these birds, and also definitely their habits. Clap traps is one of the very important way to capture birds when they are in groups, they are in flocks, they are gathering in smaller areas. So what you do, you prepare a net and tie with the rope. This net will be opened, and you will employ, or you will deploy this net in the area where birds are frequently gathering. So when they are out of that area, you will deploy this clap traps, and when birds are gathering in the same area, you will pull the triggering wires, and when you pull the triggering wires, the clap trap will be closed, and the birds in the trap will be trapped. So in this picture, the crane is trapped in the clap trap. Shorebirds is especially the target species when we talk about clap traps. So these three methods are very effective in the Indian context. You employ either a net or a slip knot noose trap or clap traps. So now once we have the birds in our hand, we require ringing equipment. So first and foremost procedure in bird ringing is that you cover their eyes, because once you capture the birds, they will be very panicked. They will be too frightened to be in humans' hand. So you need to capture their eyes. So in the case of raptors, since this falconry is very famous and across the world, particularly in Middle East, they have developed particular hoods. But if the hoods are not available, because hoods have their particular sizes, And if your target species is ranged from smaller to larger species, you can go with the alternative. You can use the cotton sock. However, this sock should be black in color, and it should be thick so that birds cannot see uh, outside the sock. So this is the way you calm the bird. Once they are closed, their eyes are closed, they will be rapidly calming down. So after the calming birds, you start measuring, because ringing alone may be helpful, but if we take their measurements, their morphometric, it will definitely give our information to us about their ages, their age, their breeding stage, their uh, the stage of life, where whether they are start in the starting of a breeding season or they are non-breeding season. So, and also their fitness of ringing, because not every bird is fit for ringing. So once you are done with the measurements, you use the ringing plier. This plier is very specific. You can see these notches in the pliers. So these notches help to close the ring around in the leg of birds. So based on the size of bird, you decide the size of ring, and based on size of ring, you decide the plier. So here are some examples of metal and plastic rings which are being used across the world. So these metal rings have unique ID numbers and also the information of the ringer. For example, in India, if you buy metal rings from BNHS, you will get the aluminium ring, which has written the BNHS address on it, so that some after ringing, some other researcher recapture that bird, he or she can contact BNHS and inform about the recovery of these rings. So this metal rings is one way when we can mark the birds. One of the better way, or one of the more effective way, is to ring birds with the plastic bands, because the plastic bands have more visible numbers. So plastic bands comes with multiple numbering combinations. This can be alphabetic or numeric or alphanumeric combination as well. So these are the unique codes, and also the colors which are unique in their nature, because across the flyway ranges of birds, different countries have designated different colors to themselves, so that very on the observation we can be sure that, okay, this bird has came from Kazakhstan, this bird has came from Mongolia. After deciding, or after understanding the region based on the color, we can go further details using the alphanumeric codes written on the ring. So you can see in the case of godwit, here there are different color combinations. So when you talk about very smaller rings, of course, in the case of large birds, you have the larger ring, so you can put the numbers. But in the case of very small birds, you may not in position to give the alphanumeric codes to the ring. In that case, you can use the color combinations. So you can use multiple number of rings and give different color codes, and based on which you identify that bird, which will give further information. Also, in the case of waders especially, people are using flags, because I said that very smaller rings might not have enough space to write the numbers. But if we equip that ring with a flag, then we have a space to write this number. And this number will give the identity of that bird, which will in turn give the crucial information about that particular birds. So again, this color of the flags and also the combination of ring and flag is specific to different countries, and based on which we know their migration. So here are some examples how the bending or ringing of birds can be useful to us. This pied cuckoo. So this is very interesting story. I tagged this pied cuckoo during 2019-20. So from Wildlife Institute of India, there is very small grassland patch behind the institute campus. So in 2019, I captured this pied cuckoo and ring it with yellow ring. But in when we were recapturing the pied cuckoos in the season 2020, we got the same cuckoo again. So it is very interesting that the pied cuckoo that we tagged in 2019 came back to the same spot from where we captured it. So this is giving the idea how site faithful the pied cuckoos are in the case of their breeding grounds. Another example of demoiselle crane, this demoiselle crane is having yellow colored ring. You can see the alpha, the numeric code on the leg. So this crane was actually tagged in the northern latitudes in Russian parts and migrated to Kutch region. However, there are difficulties involved with the ringing or with this particular method, because if you want to understand the migration or the movement or whatever your specific question is, you need to after the ringing you need to resight that bird, and resighting ratio or resighting probability is very less, because when the birds are in flock it can be easier or the bird is very site specific or very site faithful, then it can be easier. But if you talk about birds like flamingos, they are living in flocks, thousands and hundreds and thousands of individuals all together. In this case, it is very difficult to resight that bird. So therefore, we need to ring hundreds of birds to get the sizable data. And also this ringing can give only limited information. You can see from point A to point B, the bird has moved. But we cannot say for sure that within A to B, what are the areas that it has traveled. So this is one of the limitations of bird ringing. In order to overcome the limitations of ringing, though the ringing is giving very crucial information on the migratory routes and also the differential habits of migration, it has certain limitations that I just discussed. So in order to overcome these limitations, there are many technological and also the methodological advancement in migration studies. So one of very revolutionary advancement and is the innovation of invention of transmitter. So these transmitters are the devices which are being attached to birds that records the GPS location of birds as they move. And based on the GPS locations, we can prepare tracks of their movement. So these transmitters are different in size. They use different technologies. So I will discuss few of the types of tags. So one of which is nanotag. So as name suggests, nanotags is very small in size. It is weighing between 0.2 to 2.6 gram. So since they are very small in size, they can be glued to feathers of birds. So these nanotags are especially useful for birds like swallows and very small waders and very small other passerines apart from swallow. So these tags requires receiver station networks. So these are kind of passive technology. So across, if we want to track the migration route along the Indian coast, for example, we need to deploy the receiver station along the Indian coast, and then we equip the birds with these nanotags. And when the birds are coming in the network of these receiver stations, they will record their locations. Other interesting transmitters and widely used transmitters are satellite tags. So satellite tags like Argos that determines the location based on signals from the tag. So here we don't need the receiver station network, but we need the satellite network in the sky or in the atmosphere. So these tags are being attached to the back of the birds, and they will they will be working on the Argos satellite system. They will be using essentially the triangulation method. So when three or more number of satellites are sensing the signal sent by this transmitter, they will use triangulation based on which they will decide where this bird is. So this is again the tag is only sending the signals out, and the satellite in the sky will decide where the signals are coming from, where what is the origin. The origin definitely is attached with the birds. So like this they are giving the GPS locations. This was the satellite tags has been widely used in India and abroad, and in the case of India it was first time used in 1993 1994 when Japanese scientists tagged common cranes from Keoladev National Park in Rajasthan. So I will be talking more about this particular tagging in upcoming slides. Also, scientists are using geolocators. So when it is not possible to use the nanotag or to overcome the limitations of nanotag where it requires the receiver station network, scientists are using geolocators. So geolocators are using sunlight intensity and digital clock. So we know that in different parts of the world, there are different intensity of sunlight and also the direction at which sunlight is falling. So based on this, the transmitter attached to birds will decide their locations. However, there is the limit as these geolocators are more useful or more effective when you want to study the birds which are going rather far in distance, because the intensity will not much vary if we talk about very small ranges. So these are the basic types, and one of very recent technology is the GPS GSM based transmitters. So these are the transmitters that now started being used in India as well. We are using this transmitter to track the migratory journeys of cranes and also the flamingos. So these tags, unlike the satellite transmitter I just talked about, these tags are active tags. In the case of satellite transmitter, the transmitter was just sending the signal, and satellites were using triangulation to decide from where where the signal was coming, and based on that they were deciding the location. But in the case of GPS GSM based transmitter, the transmitter itself deciding its own location and recording the data in the form of GPS location and sending it to the users through the GSM network. They can work on 2G, 3G, and 4G networks, and now they will be working on 5G phone network as well. Essentially, these transmitters are solar powered. In these images, you can see these black panels. These are solar panels, and that is why their battery life or their lifetime is rather longer compared to earlier versions of of the transmitters. You can put this transmitter as a backpack. For example, this brown transmitter. So you can attach this transmitter to the back of bird using the Teflon harness. Another transmitter can be attached to the leg of the birds. So this is very simple transmitter. You just fit these clamps with the transmitter in the leg of the birds. Also, in the case of goose and swan, we can use the neck collar transmitter. So this variety or the large range of different types of transmitter are now helping us better understand the migration of the birds. And very recently, now people are using eBird to understand how birds are migrating from one area to another area. So you all must be using eBird up to certain levels. So the information or the location information that you are providing on eBird along with the timings are actually useful to map the migratory routes. For example, the spotted flycatcher here, you can see the movement from north to south. So this entire map or entire visualization is prepared through eBird. So now that since you know that eBird data is very crucial, you can use the eBird more responsibly. You will be feeling more proud about yourself that the data that you are uploading in eBird is actually being useful to understand this amazing phenomena of migration in birds. So let's talk about let's talk more about migration route patterns, because in subsequent I will be talking about differential migration strategies adopted by birds. So there are three major patterns in migration routes, one of which is detour migration. So this N be the southern parts where non-breeding areas, so when birds travel from non-breeding areas to breeding areas, they take a detour to avoid any obstacle, basically the geographical barrier that falls in their migration path. So they are going uh, for the longer route, taking a detour to reach their breeding grounds. The loop migration, during onward migration from their breeding ground to non-breeding ground, they are traveling on one path. While returning, they are traveling on different paths, making a loop. And then there is a linear, where there is a straight line, virtual straight line of migration or migratory path. So this is example of common crane. This left example, the Higuchi et al. 1994. This was the very first effort that was made in India to understand the migration, to understand migration of any species, to start with a common crane. So in 1994, they they successfully tagged two common cranes, and that migrated towards Russia, crossing the Kazakhstan. Bred in Kazakhstan-Russia border. Again, in the late 1990s, essentially during the 1999, Higuchi, the same scientist, again tagged few common cranes from Gujarat and recorded their migration path through the telemetry. So we need to note that these two efforts are very essential effort. They are very primitive and in nature. So these efforts were done through satellite transmitters, and because it was very limited technology, you can see very straight lines here. So these straight lines are simply the connection between two subsequent locations. So here, when it is providing very important information about its migratory paths, it's still we are losing the information, as in what are those specific areas being traveled by the common cranes. You can see this straight line. So from point 1 to point 2, what are the areas that crane has traveled? What are the areas where it made the stopovers? So these are the information which were lost in this particular effort, but still it provided the crucial information about the breeding and wintering ground of common cranes. However, with the technological advancement, I talked about the GPS GSM transmitter. This is the effort made by me for my PhD thesis. So I am working on the common crane migration strategies under the guidance of Dr. Suresh Kumar in Wildlife Institute of India. And with the help of my amazing team, I tagged few common cranes from Nal Sarovar and Thol Ramjar sites. And this is what we have got so far. So you will see very fine scale movement path of 5 common cranes that we have tagged. So you will see this dots are along the migration path. These are the dots where the cranes have made stopovers. So in this effort, we have collected very crucial information about their migration altitude, about their migration speed, about their number of stopovers, and very essentially their migration habit. We came to know that birds, of course, it was known up to certain level, but we got more information as the birds are traveling during the daytime only, and they are roosting during the nighttime, also in the during the migration process. And in a process, they are making use of the thermals in the desert habitats of Pakistan, Afghanistan, and Turkmenistan. So with the advancement, we are gaining more knowledge about the migration. So this is actually the extra limit of Central Asian Flyway. One more efforts which is being made in the Central Asian Flyway is the migration study of steppe eagle. This effort was made by Batbayer and his team in Mongolia. So again, like the common crane migration that we have studied, their migration studies are also giving very fine scale details, as in when the birds was moving where. So the steppe eagle has traveled all the way to India by crossing the Tibetan Plateau and the Himalayan region. So here we are getting day-to-day details. And more importantly, it is also giving the information about the altitude and the speed of the migration. So of course, this zero altitude is definitely when the birds are in resting. But these are the altitudes where they are flying. Also the speed, at which speed you can see the bar here that most of the time they are flying at the speed of 40 kilometer per hour. And in this map, you can see how the birds has navigated to cross the Himalayan region. What are their route site along their migration path? And you can see the Mount Everest here. So birds has traveled, and then after detouring from the Mount Everest, they have crossed the Himalayan region, because the Mount Everest being very high in altitude, they cannot, or it is rather difficult to cross that. So this is the information that now we are getting through GPS telemetry and also the satellite telemetry. Another example of bar-headed goose here, these white crosses you can see are the mountain ranges or mountains which are more than 8,000 meters in height. Here is our Kanchenjunga mountain. So the bar-headed goose, again very well known for its migration altitude. So this is one of the species which is migrating is at the highest altitudes. So you can see how the migration altitude is changing with the changing altitude of the geographical features they are migrating upon. So after entering India, their migration altitude is going down, and they are now traveling all the way to southern India. One more. So these are the efforts which are giving us the absolute migration path. So these paths are largely for a single individual or multiple individuals, but still we are getting only one line. We are not getting idea about entire flyway or entire path where other birds might be traveling. So to overcome this particular problem, there are methodological advancement in studying the migration. One of very crucial advancement is the use of dynamic Brownian bridge movement model to map the migration flyway of the birds. So this particular GIS modeling is useful to understand the migration path. It is also useful to understand what are the stopover sites and the level at which the birds are using those stopover sites when they are migrating. So here in this red area, these are the stopover site of many birds. This orange area has the core movement site, and this yellow area are their entire migration flyway or entire migration path. So briefly to talk about the Brownian bridge movement model. So this particular method uses the different parameters to decide the particular corridor of birds. So they are using this particular model is using the distance, time between two subsequent locations. It is also using the location error, because since these locations are being recorded by satellite or by GPS of the transmitter itself, there are some errors associated with it. So this particular model is also accounting for that error, and also it is accounting the Brownian motion variance. Based on all this parameters, it is deciding what are the areas being used mostly by birds along the migration flyway. But this is again, it is based on Brownian movement. So Brownian movement is random movement. Okay, it is definitely accounting the momentum, accounting the speed and the direction, but still it is rather a random movement. So we need something more robust, and that is why we need something more dynamic, because not necessarily definitely birds are not moving randomly. So that is why uh, there is one advanced modeling which is the dynamic in nature, and that's why it is dynamic Brownian bridge model. So dynamic Brownian bridge model is accounting for the specific direction and specific uh, speed at which birds are moving. And using these two things, they are deciding the probability where the birds will go the next. And also it is accounting the change in behavior. Changing behavior in a way that at certain period of time, there was this speed at which bird was flying. After that, the speed has changed. After that, again, the speed has changed. So the subsequent changes in speed and direction are helping this model to build entire flyway. And this is very effective to distinguish between the stopover site, the core movement sites, and the flyway as a whole. So again, you can see that this model has identified two different flyways for the multiple species, basically the goose and ducks. So here this yellow line is the Central Asian flyway, and this blue line is East Asian Australasian flyway at which the birds are flying. Then there is a very curious case of demoiselle crane in the Central Asian flyway. So this is the effort done in early 90s or mid 90s, where the scientists from the north tagged few demoiselle cranes, and they travel all the way to Gujarat. In a process, again, they crossed the Tibetan Plateau, which is very high mountain range, and then the mighty Himalaya, and entered in the plains, Gangetic plains of India, and then Rajasthan and India and Gujarat. So again, you can see that there is a lot more information being lost in this or being not revealed in this particular tracking effort, where the point-to-point location, point-to-point tracks are there, but within these tracks, what are the areas being used by cranes is not revealed. And also, now we know that this was a kind of incomplete migration routes, because very recently in 2021, the scientist from Mongolia has tracked more than 10 demoiselle cranes, and now they know that the cranes are making loop migration. They are not going, they are coming from Himalayas. So while they come from their breeding ground to wintering ground in Gujarat, they are crossing the Himalayas. But when they are coming back, for them it is inbound migration. In our context, it is actually the return migration. So when they are going from Gujarat to their Mongolian breeding site, they are actually taking a detour, so to avoid the harsh conditions of Himalayas. So this is the loop migration, which was not being recorded in early efforts. But the question is why birds are doing so. What are the reasons? Is this the habitat? Is this the climatic conditions, and or is the simply the Himalaya itself? So to answer that, they have actually used the actual flyway, and using the artificial intelligence, they have simulated the flyways, the reverse flyways. So what they have found that the both on-ground and aloft condition play a key role in explaining demoiselle cranes loop migration. Okay, so to explain very briefly, if you see here, it is talking about the surface temperature, and here the NDVI, it is actually indicating the amount of vegetation there. So this is the actual scenario. When birds is migrating to Gujarat, here it is getting better NDVI. But If you force them to migrate other way around, they are coming from Gujarat this way. But if you ask them to go this way, then see here, they are not getting better NDY conditions there. Similarly, they are going using the detour migration, and this is the when they are getting better NDY here. But if you force them to come back from that detoured migration, you see here they are not getting better NDVI conditions. And this is the same case with the surface temperature, thermal uplift, and wind support. So this says that birds are actually adopting differential migration routes during inbound and outbound migrations based on the conditions, ground conditions, and also the wind conditions, which is wind condition, and wind support, which is aloft conditions. Also, there is one more explanation to the loop migration of Damoiselle cranes. This is one more effort which is being made by me et al. So they are proposing that Damoiselle spring migration obeyed the time minimization hypothesis to avoid colder Tibetan plateau and benefited by abundant food, higher thermal and orographic uplift along the migration route. So this says that when they are going from Gujarat to Mongolia, they are being benefited by the conditions of thermal in the deserts of Afghanistan and Turkmenistan. Because they are large-bodied birds, they requires thermal uplift to migrate using very minimum energy. So they are using this route during going from Gujarat to Mongolia. But when they are coming from Mongolia to Gujarat, they minimize their energy by traveling for shorter period of time. And what is the shorter period? What they have to do if they want to shorter their period? They just need to travel very straight. So that is why they are traveling from Mongolia to Gujarat, crossing the Tibetan Plateau and Himalaya. So if they want to do the other way around, they are not getting better conditions, and it will be difficult for them to go from Gujarat to Mongolia, crossing the Himalayas, rather than coming the way to from Mongolia to Gujarat. So to summarize, I have prepared one map which is talking about the Central Asian migration flyway as a whole. So you can see from Kazakhstan to Mongolia, the birds are using the differential migration flyways to come to India, and particularly in Gujarat. So Gujarat landscape, the vast grassland of Gujarat, particularly Kutch and the Saurashtra region, are very suitable for migratory birds. Of course, other parts like Rajasthan is useful for them if I talk about land birds. And also the shore birds, we have very vast coastline. So from very broad breeding range, birds are coming in very narrow area. And that is why we are seeing the large congregation of birds like cranes and ducks and goose in our areas. So if we talk about the conservation of migratory birds, we don't need to, we just can't conserve only one area. We need to conserve their wintering grounds. We need to conserve their stopover site along the migration route, and we need to conserve the breeding grounds. So being in a wintering ground, it is our responsibility on the Earth Day. It is our responsibility to conserve the wildlife habitats around us. So with this, I would end my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Harindra. It was wonderful, and you have given a very comprehensive information. And in future also, we will try to have your benefit by arranging some other talk. Thank you very much.